Hello, everybody, and welcome back to the Charity Charge Show. Our goal is to power nonprofits. And the other way that we do that is through equitable access to financial resources. So if you have any questions about that, feel free to reach out to us. Today, we are joined by Dr. Chisholm. She is the president and CEO of Step Forward, and their goal is to bring people from poverty to self-sustainability and, and just enrich the communities in their area. Thank you so much for joining us today. Tell me a little bit more about the work that y'all are doing out at Step Forward.
Sure. Good morning, and thank you, Grayson, for the opportunity to have the conversation. Step Forward is about 60 years old, and it was initially part of the War on Poverty, 1965, Lyndon Johnson. And so the plan then, as now, is to help low-income families in a number of ways. We provide emergency services, that's food, clothing, furniture, whatever the need may be. We help with energy assistance, paying bills, and especially this last year with the weather being as cold as it's been, the number of families that would have gone without had it not been for the services. We also help people find jobs. We have counseling services. We also provide services for families for children who are 6 weeks to 5-year-olds, and that's through Head Start, and our mothers, pregnant women. So we do a number of things. And then you and I talked about before we started was how does one encapsulate all of what we do? And it's really just helping low-income families become self-sufficient.
That is incredible. And, a storied history. Your organization has been around for 60 plus years. And correct me if I'm wrong, you've been there for over 10 years.
Yes.
Tell me a little bit more about how the organization has changed and shifted in these 10 years that you've been there.
The biggest change, to be honest with you, for an organization that is multi-million dollars, our revenue is about $50 million. We were still using typewriters 10 years ago. We didn't have any of our files in the cloud. I had lots of paper on my desk, things that I had to sign. Well, now all of the systems, literally every system in the organization has been automated over the past 10 years. So now it's a point and click. And so that makes it easier for us. And we've also raised salaries. We had a number of our staff who were eligible to receive our services because of the low salaries that we were paying. And so over a period of time, we started really looking at how we were spending the money, and anything that didn't make sense, we stopped and we put those dollars instead into salaries. So now we have, I believe every employee is at least above a living wage.
Amazing. Well, that's two really important topics to dive into there. And let's stick with the salary. Tell me a little bit more about what your thoughts are and how that the positive benefits that you've seen in terms of the culture of the company.
So let me start with one of the first things that I did. And I have to mention this because I think it's important. 5 months before I arrived, my predecessor went to prison. So when I arrived, you had an organization and the staff were scared. Some of them were angry about what was happening. We also had funders who were trying to figure out whether or not they needed to continue funding the organization. So when I walked in the door, I literally was like, oh my God, number one, do you really want to do this job?
Now,
Multiple fires or multiple, and then I found out we were using, typewriters. So one of the things that I did, the previous administration really didn't give the employees an opportunity to ask questions. And so we had a staff day and I did a Q&A, a question and answer with staff. And one of the first things that I heard was, I have not had an increase in 5 or 6 years. And my comment then was, I don't know enough about it. Let me look into it. Okay. And one of the things I've always said to people, you should not ask any employee for input if you're not willing to do something with it. So we just started looking at it. And sure enough, there are a number of employees that had not had increases. Now, the issue at the time in the organization, and I think I can say this comfortably, there seemed to be a culture of, and I'm a psychological anthropologist by training. So when I walk into any environment, I'm looking at culture, the culture that's been communicated and the one that, the system support. And usually they're not always in sync. And that was what I found here. And so I started looking at the salaries, and literally the way things seemingly operated was, if I liked you, you got an increase. If I didn't, you didn't. It had nothing to do with your performance. It had everything to do with relationships. So we had to first standardize that. So we now have, I brought in a consultant and we looked at all of the job descriptions, and we now have 22 categories, employment categories, that have established minimum, midpoint, and maximum salaries so that we could at least get everybody slotted into it and figure out where their salaries were. And so that was the most important thing, is making sure that everyone understood we heard you and we responded. As far as the increases were concerned, once it became clear that the information that I was given during that meeting was true, and really looking at the salaries, and we had people making $8 an hour.
Yeah.
Okay. And like I said, I have a personal issue with with us paying our employees little money when the work that we do. So we're asking them to take care of people and we're not paying them, a reasonable salary. So once we started raising salaries, it became easier because what staff saw was we said what we were going to do and we did.
Mm.
Now, it would be wonderful for me to tell you that every person is happy. That would be a lie. Because even when we raise salary, there's still going to be people who said, well, shouldn't I get more? And that may be a true statement, but the reality is the agency is 98% funded by the federal government. So we have the largest grant is Head Start, and then we have two smaller grants from the state, but that's still federal money, and that's Community Service Block Grant, CSBG, and the Home Energy Assistance Program Grant, HEAP. And so when you look at that, we have no control over how much is allocated. And so we have to work within that budget. The other issue, and I assume we're going to get to it later on, is about fundraising. The organization, I don't think anyone was thinking necessarily about philanthropy. And so there's no endowment for the organization. So we have to build, we just hired a consultant to help us really put that in place. It has not been part of the culture of the organization. So we're helping the organization understand that there's an issue of sustainability and you cannot depend on federal grants, and especially now, you cannot depend on federal grants. So, your question, Grayson.
Yes, yes. And from what you said, what stood out to me is that accountability and the deliverability and keeping your promise to
Yes.
your staff and how important that is to the culture of a nonprofit.
And let me add one other thing to that. It's keeping your promises important, but also helping the staff understand that they're important. Because too often what we do is we expect people to work. But if I don't take care of you as the employee, then I can't expect you to do your best for the clients that we serve. So I've been intentional with employees to tell them that just raising salaries is one way that I demonstrate that. But the other way that I demonstrate that, or we demonstrate that as a leadership team, is when we acknowledge people. What we tell them is, I see you. I see the work that you do. I see the value that's inherent in the work that you do and the contribution that you make in order for us to do the work that we do to take care of people who need our help. So I think that's
Incredible.
equally important.
Yes. And what I would love to dive into is how you are seeing that play out this year. There's so much uncertainty as you spoke to federal funding, and it sounds like your organization has been navigating that, especially the dependence upon the kind of federal grants that you were mentioning. How has it been? You've built up this culture and this great team at your organization over its last 10 years. How has that allowed you to be adaptable to this pressure that's happening in terms of your funding?
I think the most important thing, especially as a leader, is people have to trust you to be led by you. They have to trust you. Otherwise, they do it because they have to, not because they want to. So we've spent a lot of time on the front end helping people understand that you can trust us, that we really care about you, and it's not lip service. And because that's the case, and I have, and my team is used to me telling people this, and I normally start this with everyone I have a conversation with, is I have a personal mission statement of open, honest, direct communication. And I always say, are you comfortable with that? Everyone says yes until I start doing it. So I've said that to our staff from the beginning. This is who I am. This is how I operate. I've said it to staff. I've said it to funders. I said it to anyone that we're having any relationship, any meeting. You need to understand that this is who I am and how I operate. And so establishing that from the beginning helped people understand that I was, number one, serious about it, that I was going to be transparent. If I make a mistake, and I don't care who I make the mistake with or to, I apologize because I recognize the importance of role modeling it. So if I'm wrong, I apologize. The other issue is if anything happens in the organization, anything bad that happens in the organization, I take responsibility for that. It's my failure as a leader. Anything that good happens in the organization, we share the wealth. I can't get it done without them, and I say that, and they know that. The other issue when I first arrived was, and this was something that someone who works in Columbus, Columbus is the state capital of Ohio. And one of our colleagues down there told me that a former administrator told her, my people try to give me their ideas. I tell them what to think. Now, if that was the way things operated within the organization, can you imagine how people had to operate in the organization?
Mm.
So my job when I first arrived was I have my phone and I would walk down the hall. We have how many 10 Head Start sites and then 4 neighborhood opportunity centers or opportunity centers. So in the main office, Pharrell, I think it's Pharrell, had I'm Happy, that song.
Yeah.
I would walk around the building playing that song because I wanted people to understand that the world has changed. That would never have happened before. Number two, I'm a hugger. And so I normally, if I'm in a meeting, first thing we'll do is you can shake my hand, but after the meeting is over, I'll say, are you comfortable with a hug? I'm a hugger. So I went to every site and I hugged people. And I met with every employee that we had at the time. It took me a long time to do it because at the time we had 420 employees. But I would go to every site and I would meet with each one for at least half an hour. And I wanted to know who they were. Why did they choose the organization? What was their role? Are they doing what they wanted to do? Because that's also, to me, part of leadership is helping people get to where they want to go or making
100%.
certain that they're sitting in the right seat. And then last question always is there anything that any ideas you have about making your division better, your department better, the agency better, or any questions that you may have of me? So I gave them the opportunity to hear from me directly, and that also built trust. So that when all of this stuff started happening, you can take what I say to the bank because I've built over time the reputation of being transparent.
100%. I love that answer. And something I'd love to dive into is what maybe about your background has
Mhm.
allowed you to come into this role and be comfortable in establishing these relationships. Do you think that the doctor of philosophy in that psychological and educational anthropology has that allowed you to really kind of understand situations well, come in and kind of analyze it and kind of almost figure out what the existing processes are already.
So I'm going to answer your question in 2 ways. Yes, I think it helps. The challenge with being an anthropologist, number one, when I told my mother I was going to be an anthropologist, she said, "You're going to dig bones." I said, "No, no, no. That's physical anthropology. I'm cultural anthropology." And she said, "What job are you going to get?" And I said, "I have no idea. All I knew was it was my passion." And so I always tell people in one of the conversations you and I are going to have about leadership is follow your passion. That was my passion. I didn't know where it was going to lead me. So I was just as surprised as anybody else that it led me here. But I knew walking in the door, and I say this to everyone, my process takes a while. From the front end, I ask lots of questions, and it's not to criticize or critique. The questions that I'm asking are helping me understand the organization, that cultural mix. And so the way that I've processed it, or at least tried to explain it to other people, is it's kind of like putting a quilt together. And a quilt has different pieces and parts, or using the analogy of a puzzle. So my job when I walk into any environment is to understand what the pieces are. And then in my mind, they're up like in the ceiling. And then I say, okay, I need that piece. I need that piece. I don't need that piece. And so then I'll put it all back together in such a way that makes sense, at least in my mind. Okay. And then I have to explain it to other people
And
so that they
communicate
can
it.
see
Yeah.
the vision and understand why I chose that and not that. The other issue is, I won't call it as an anthropologist, but I'll say as a leader. When you're walking into a new environment, there's certain things that are sacred cows. There's certain people who are sacred cows. And in this environment, some of the sacred cows were toxic to the organization. And so it had gotten to the point where it's either them or me. And I'm still here. But at certain processes, if you cannot explain to me why we do that, what's the rationale behind that, I don't ask why questions. Why? But the question is, help me understand the rationale for doing that. And what I often got was, it's a requirement, it's a regulation. And then my next question was, or a comment was, show me the reg. And usually like 80, 90% of the time, it never existed. And so the minute that happened, it was, that is subject to change. because you can't explain to me why we continue doing it. There's no reason for us to continue doing something that counterproductive to efficiency, effectiveness. So we literally, when you ask the question, kind of where does that come from? I think part of it is being an anthropologist and looking at it in terms of culture and things that make sense. But I can remember when I was little, I love puzzles. I love bringing order to chaos. I'm a transformational leader. I didn't know that until I was probably in my 50s, and I'm in my 60s now. I didn't know what you called it. All I knew was that I was often the first person to do the job, right? Creating departments and divisions, or walking into a project like I was the project director of the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame's archive with no background in construction, but I have a background in systems, and I love systems. And I've often told my team, if we have to go around, again, I like analogies. If we have to go around that tree more than once, there should be a system that third time. I'm not going to continue going around the same tree. I'm not going to do it. It makes no sense. And I don't like wasting my time. I don't like wasting anybody else's time. Does that answer
Amazing.
your question, Grayson?
Yes, thank you so much. I would love to dive back into the kind of challenges that the nonprofit sector is facing today. How have you navigated it? What are the actual actions that are taking place in terms of navigating that and working on diversifying revenue and funding for your organization?
We've always, because of the funding being primarily federal or state as a pass through, we've always functioned on advocacy. We've always gone to Columbus. We've always gone to the federal government. I go twice a year to walk the Hill. We've always done that because we understood where the funding comes from. We've just ramped it up. So a year ago, there was a vice president who had two responsibilities. Now he has one, and that's advocacy for the organization. And that's really his background. His name is Douglas Bennett. So Doug's job is to keep our face in front of legislators. Every time the National Head Start Association, there are advocates at the national level for the Head Start program. We're actively engaged with them. At the state level, it's the Ohio Association. What is it? Ohio Head Start Association. We also have the Ohio Association of Community Action Agencies. There's a national, I can't remember, it's NCAP, National Community Action Foundation, and they do the advocacy for community service block grant and heat. There's a National Community Action Partner. So there are all these organizations. We've always been engaged with them, even more so now, because legislators, you have to help them understand the importance of the work. Again, I've said this to other people. In the nonprofit area, years ago, you used to be able to talk about social justice. Now you can't. That doesn't resonate anymore. And especially in an environment where the people who are in control, it's business. So you have to understand and talk about it in terms of business. It's, the return on the investment. For every dollar that you give us, we turn that dollar around, so for us, I think it's 1 to 11 or 1 to 13. So we have to talk about it in terms of business. So from my mindset, walking in the door, I understood this. We are a charitable business. Too often nonprofits get in trouble because they don't attend to the business aspects of what they're doing. So if I understand that we're a charitable business, and if I address the business part of it first in order for us to do the charitable work, so now I can speak to anyone about the ROI. I can talk to a legislator, and you also have to get it down to the story. You have to be a good storyteller. You have to bring clients with you, and especially clients in their district, so that they can put a face to it. Because in many cases, these are just dollars. These are large dollars. It's just a grant. There's so many other grants. But if I can show you the impact of it on a person, especially in your district, then it makes it easier to have that conversation
And tugs at the heart, for sure.
and to trust that as a nonprofit, because we understand business, that we are attending to the business of the organization efficiently.
I love that. And for, our nonprofit audience that's listening in, how does it inform the charity side and the mission? And how does that mission inform the business side? And how are you seeing that they play a role together?
So for me, again, walking in the door, I've had this mindset long before I got here. They're parallel. They're parallel. I must attend to the business because it's the business that allows me to do the charitable work. But the charitable work is the reason that they give us the grant. So it has to be equal. I need to be as good. The organization has to be good and a good steward of the funds that we're entrusted. But with those funds, they allow us to do the charitable work. The mission of the organization is dependent on it. So those two are equally important. And you have to think of it as a leader, you have to think of it in those, in my opinion, in those terms. They're equally important. One is no more important than the other. They have to be co-equal, and you have to attend to both at the same time.
Percent. What would you say is one piece of advice you would have for each side of that coin? For that business side and then for that mission side?
For the business side, make sure you have a really good CFO and finance department, period, end. Okay. For the leader of the organization, make sure you understand what the financials are telling you. Because if you don't, and you cede all of that to the CFO, then you've shirked your responsibility as the leader of the organization. You need to understand the numbers. You absolutely have to understand it. On the other end, for the charitable work or the mission work of the organization, you have to hire good people. You have to hire people who care about it. And I tell our staff all the time, I get the fact that nobody here is independently wealthy, because if they were, chances are they wouldn't work. I can't guarantee you that if I won the lotto, that I'm here tomorrow. Now, would I donate to the organization? Absolutely. Sorry for the endowment. But what I say to the staff is, let us all agree that we work because we have to work. Okay, but you had other options, the other places you could have worked. But if you choose to work here and if you choose to stay here, then this is what we're asking you to do. We're asking you on a daily basis to bring the best game that you can bring that day. Best game. Your A game, wonderful if you can bring it that day. But if your best is a C, I expect you to whatever the best is, because our clients, they deserve that. For the team that I have 7 vice presidents, every one of them high quality, passionate about the work, understand the mission, reason that they're here and they stay is because of the mission. All of us are mission driven. If if you have not bought in and sold out to the mission of that organization, maybe you shouldn't be there. Maybe you should, if it's just a job to you, maybe you shouldn't be there, because I require every person on my team. I need to understand that they're going to pull as hard as I'm pulling. And if they're not, maybe they shouldn't be on my team.
I love that. And that's also the competitive advantage that the nonprofit space has in terms of retaining talent over a for-profit organization is that mission and the fact that you feel like you're contributing to something that is a benefit to society.
Yes.
It's one of the unique strengths of the nonprofit world. I would love to dive into, you've been at the organization for a little over 10 years. Where do you see the next 10 years going for your organization? And what's on the time horizon for a step forward?
In the next 10 years, I mean, to be honest with you, it's just been trying to make it through the next year because of all the changes in.
Yeah, well, we can narrow it down. What does the next year look like for you at the organization? And navigating the federal funding, making sure the advocacy is there. But what does the work of the organization look like? Is the need growing?
Yeah, absolutely. The need is growing. The best way that I can position it is COVID. COVID was a time none of us saw coming. And all of a sudden, people were out of work. People who had never needed support before suddenly needed support. And we scrambled trying to figure out how to meet the need. I see the same thing on the horizon here. And the challenge now is the federal government understood that money needed to be available because people were hurting. It's not what you have now. So we have to be smarter with limited funds. So things that we may have been able to do in the past, we can't do anymore. So we have to really look at how we're deploying our resources, including people. There's been a shortage of teachers throughout the country, and that's K-12, that's pre-K. We have 52 vacancies. We can't open 22 classrooms because of it. And so now we're looking at consolidating. You just have to be smarter about the business. And part of it is hoping for the best. Part of it is advocating for more. Part of it is the fundraising. Like I said, 60-year-old organization, and nobody thought to put an endowment in place. Nobody thought about the sustainability of the organization. I think that the challenge for any leader, and not just nonprofit, but any leader, is you need to look far enough down the road to think about how are you positioning the organization. When you talked about like 10 years from now, I hope we have $5 to $10 million endowment. That's what I hope. that the work that we've done will allow us to do that, to grow it, because that helps the organization over time. When I arrived, we did not have a line of credit in an organization at one point that was $60 million. And no one, again, no one thought cash flow. Yeah,
Yeah.
we're talking about the business of the organization. These are like basic things that you
No,
put.
it's shocking.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I'm telling you.
And that's what we do at, yeah, at Charity Charge. It's like our mission is to provide that equitable access 100%. And it's surprising that the organizations that have this base of revenue, they're not taking advantage of it, and they don't even know about the tools that are out there to support their work and mission.
I want to go back to the question that you asked earlier,
Yes, of course.
because this is what I think has changed over time. 30, 40, 50 years ago, a nonprofit leader would have primarily focused or solely focused on mission. Today's nonprofit leader must address the business. It's changed. Leadership in this day and time, you almost have to have a background in business, or at least be familiar enough with it. Like I said, you have to be able to read your financial reports. You have to understand what they need. Whereas years ago, that wasn't as important, because the thing that was more important was meeting the need that that nonprofit was created to meet. Okay. That's not true anymore. That's not true anymore. So going back to this particular question, 10 years from now, my hope is, and my expectation, if we do it right now, if we take care of it now, is that the organization will be bigger, better, stronger, more stable than it's ever been financially. The programs, we've spent a lot of time looking at data. That was another thing that the organization, as far as I could tell, didn't do. So we kept doing the same things over and over, whether or not they were relevant. And I believe that any nonprofit, you have to continue asking the question: are we meeting the need, today's need, not the reason that you were created in the beginning, but are we meeting today's need? And
And
if
how
you're
it's
not
changed.
doing that, yeah, it's changed. And I'm comfortable. I'm comfortable with and I've said this to staff: if we're not meeting the need, then give them money to some other organization that is. Because I'm not interested. I'm not interested. Now, this is not always a popular thing to say, but I'm really not interested in continuing the agency if the agency is no longer relevant. It doesn't help the community just to be able to say that we have 320 people and we have all this money, but that the community doesn't benefit. I'm not interested in doing that. If it's not impactful, stop doing it. So we literally started looking at data, and the data was available. It was just never used for
Mm,
decision making. And so there are a number of programs we stopped. There are a number of programs we consolidated. There are a number of programs that we just started, because the data is telling us what the community needs now.
that's incredible. And for the people listening, how can they get involved and step forward? What would you ask?
Our biggest ask right now is money, just because of how precarious it is at the federal level. And let me give you an example of something that happened. We called it Terrible Tuesday. And I can't remember if it was in May. So the decision was made to stop all federal funding. And we had just sent to the bank payroll for the week. The way the federal grants work is you can draw money down directly. The state grants, you get reimbursed, right? But the bulk of the federal money, we normally draw down. Like 200 and some of our employees were on federal money. Well, that money was already sent to the banks, but we couldn't draw any money down to cover it. So that's where the cash flow came in. So first question was, what is our line of credit? All right. And then the next conversation within 2 hours of finding out that all of that had been frozen is, who are we going to have to lay off? Who can we keep? How long can we do this before we have to shut the doors of the organization? So all of those things right now comes down to money. A lot of the volunteerism here usually is in our Head Start. But in order to work with us in those areas, you have to have a background check. So I'm not telling you shouldn't do it. That would be helpful, especially in the Cleveland area or Coggin County. But right now, our biggest concern, my biggest concern, is the financial sustainability of this organization. We serve about 30,000 people a year. And if we're not here, it doesn't mean that they won't get served, but they won't get served in kind of like a one-stop shop. They'll have to keep going to all these other places to cobble, resources together. So to me, it's important for us to remain. We've been here 60 years. I would love for us to be here 60, 100, 260 years more, because the need is great. Poor people have existed. They're not going to not exist. And especially now. Think of how many people have lost their jobs, not because they've done something wrong, but because a decision was made to just cut stuff without any consideration for where are these people going to go. They still have bills to pay. They still have mortgages. They still, they still have to put food on the table. That's where we come in.
Incredible. Well, thank you so much for joining us today, Dr. Chisholm, and sharing more about the work that you're doing over at Step Forward, and for the amazing advice and lessons that you had for our nonprofit audience.
Thank you.
Thank you for joining us today.
Thank you. Appreciate it.